And so on that note, Mr. Freedom himself, Mr. Robin Ficker. So this is Christmas. Give him a big round of applause. So I know a lot of these Christmas parties, the people say, well, we have Santa Claus. Well, I don't have Santa Claus. I have Robin Ficker, which I think is a huge honor. So with that, I want to hand the microphone over to Robin, our next United States Senator.
Thank you, Glenn. Actually, I was Santa Claus for 20 years at Children's Hospital in Washington, D.C., and it really was a thrill because they would send everyone home who could go home, and the kids who stayed there at Christmas oftentimes weren't there the next Christmas. And it was really heart-rendering, especially the burn unit where these kids would be caught in house fires and have their fingers and toes more than singed. But I enjoyed it thoroughly. My wife was a pediatric surgeon at Children's Hospital. Let's start it off and remember why we're here tonight. We'll start off with a little audience participation, okay? Give me a G. G. Give me an L. L. Give me an E. E. Give me an N. N. What do you got? Glen. Okay, our next delegate. Yeah. Now, I've really got to admire Glenn. As a matter of fact, I'd almost bet my house that he gets elected in the next election in 2026 to House of Delegates, because I know that as a Robin, why wouldn't I know this? The early bird gets the worm. And here he is. He's out there every day doing something. I've been in a few parades with him, 2.5-mile parades. He's there walking. He's meeting people throughout the community. I think he really would make an ideal member of the House of Delegates because he loves Marylanders. Let's face it. He believes that the brightest person picks the best brains, and he also, I believe, thinks that every Marylander knows more about at least one subject than he does, so he's not afraid to ask questions and believes that he can learn from everyone. And I think that's the kind of person that makes an ideal representative, an ideal member of the House of Delegates. And I was in the House of Delegates, so I know a little bit about it. I congratulate him for not only his individual campaigning, but having functions like this. Here we are 2-3 years before his election, and he's got people out to find out what he has to say and how he can serve the public. So what a wonderful delegate he's going to make, and I wholeheartedly endorse him in his effort. I'm Robin Ficker, running for U.S. Senate, and I'm the only Republican candidate for U.S. Senate who has reported spending or taking in, either one, any money with the Federal Elections Commission. And if you spend at least $5,000 in your Senate campaign, you have to file with the Federal Elections Commission. And no other candidate has filed spending or raising any money at all with the Federal Elections Commission. So I'm really the only serious candidate for the U.S. Senate. Now I'll be replacing a guy who was first elected to a public office when he was 21, and then he's just retired at the age of 80. He's been in office that entire time, and he really was a walking testament to the need for term limits. And of course, I support term limits for the U.S. Senate and for Congress, as I did in my county, which is the largest county of Maryland, where I supported term limits there for the county executive and county council. And every elected official in Montgomery County was opposed to my proposal for term limits. The Washington Post ran 5 editorials against my proposal and not one in favor of it. And then I was further disappointed when we only received 70% of the vote to pass term limits. Yeah. And 5 of those tax increase specialists on the county council were not able to run for re-election because they were barred by term limits. So we had a turnover in the county council. Talk about enjoying a turnover for breakfast. We enjoyed 5 turnovers right there in one election. Try to catch a fly sometimes with your hand, and then try to catch 5 at one time, which we did. It's not easy to do. And right now we have term limits in Montgomery County, so we have fresh ideas coming in. But their idea in the last election was to increase property tax. Last year, they tried to increase, and they were able to increase property taxes 5%. And I look forward to them trying to increase property taxes again this year because the state is running a deficit, and those guys down in Annapolis and where Glen is going to try to rebut some of their efforts, all they know how to do is raise taxes. They love to spend someone else's money, and they look upon you as being an ATM. Well, it's the same thing down in the U.S. Senate. Ben Cardin, who was in the Senate, is one of 13 U.S. senators in the entire country who has voted with Joe Biden 100% of the time. He's voted for every tax increase bill, for every expensive program. And I know that with a $34 trillion deficit, we need to control spending because 1/3 now of our annual deficit is interest. We're paying interest on these bills. And your grandchildren, I have 3, and your children are going to be paying more of their hard-earned income to pay interest on the U.S. debt. So I'm not going to vote for new programs in Washington, D.C. unless we cut an old program which isn't working. So, and there are plenty of those. There's, I would say, one of the largest rooms in the U.S. Capitol is the room for improvement. We need to control spending there, and that's what I'm going to do. My home mortgage payment, which is a home equity loan, 18 months ago it was 2.5% rate. Now it floats. Now it's 8.5%, and the monthly payment's gone from like $600 to $2,000. And I know that many of you are experiencing those costs too. When President Trump left office, the average gasoline price was $1.87 a gallon. I don't think anyone's paid that in the last few years. And it was recently going back up to 4. It's come down a little bit, but we need to have energy self-sufficiency in the United States. One thing that I'm proposing to promote clean energy, to promote the fight against climate change, is to decide that Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant in Maryland should be doubled. Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant, now you may not know it, provides 37% of Maryland's electricity. It provides 80% of Maryland's no emissions electricity. So why not expand that plant, provide jobs in southern Maryland and Prince George's County, and also expand the tax base of Maryland? Why not expand a plant which has worked without incident since 1975? So we need to expand that plant. Here we are advocating the great use of electric vehicles. Well, that electricity has to come from somewhere, and I would submit that the increase in electricity that's going to be needed for our motor vehicles should come from the Calvert Cliffs nuclear plant. That's one idea that I have. Also, look at the border. Do you realize that we've had about 6.5 million unvetted immigrants come across the border, many of whom never had COVID tests, by the way, come across the border since President Biden has been in office? This past year alone, we had 26,000 Chinese nationals come across the southern border. 26,000. Guess how many Chinese nationals came across the southern border the year before that? Only 2,000. So we've had a jump the word is out in Beijing. Come to America's southern border and you'll gain entry. There's been a jump from 2,000 to 26,000 in just 1 year. We've had 700 Iranian nationals. You know what's happening, the influence of Iran there with Hamas, and in Israel, you know what's happening with the Iranian influence. Here we have 700 Iranian nationals coming into the United States. We never know when we're going to have another incident like we had at the Boston Marathon, where people are leaving bags of bombs where they figure there will be lots of American citizens. So we've got to prevent. You see what happens when there's a breach of security in a country. We've seen that just recently in Israel. You've got to have a secure border. You can't just be letting terrorists or people who are unvetted, have criminal records, come into the United States. And don't forget about the fentanyl. Fentanyl has been overdoses of fentanyl, and it doesn't take much to overdose. Maybe just a pinch of it will overdose you on fentanyl. There have been dramatic increases in the number of fentanyl deaths. In 2020, we had 2,500 Marylanders under the age of 25 die from fentanyl overdoses. That was in 2020. It's many more now. We have almost 100,000 American deaths a year from overdoses of fentanyl. Now, you used to hear, well, we had 45,000 deaths from automobile accidents. We have 100,000 deaths from fentanyl overdoses in just 1 year. It's the number one cause of death, ages 18 to 45. This stuff is coming in, and it's coming in across our southern border. It's coming in from Mexico. Now, what I would propose is that we, of course, I know there are going to be refugees coming into the United States who want to come into the United States, but they must first seek asylum in the country that's adjacent to the country that they're coming from. They don't come up to the U.S. and seek asylum. They have to seek asylum in the country that's adjacent to their country that they're fleeing from. Also, I would propose moving maybe 5,000, maybe even 10,000 administrative law judges right down to the border. And everyone who comes in, we're going to hear your case in 2 days, and we're going to decide it within a week. And then you'll know whether you can come in or not. We're not going to let folks escape into the United States for years to get an appointment sometime in May of 2027. Do you know what you're doing in May of 2027? Of course you don't. And people are going to forget those dates. We need to have immediate decisions on these administrative law cases involving immigration. Because right now we have an open border. In effect, we've repealed the immigration laws. What's next? To repeal the marital laws? To repeal the property laws? Without congressional approval, the administration has repealed the immigration laws in the United States. And it's dangerous for U.S. citizens because we have the fentanyl coming along with these folks, and we also have people coming in. We don't know what's going to happen here. We don't know what they're going to do. Many of them are terrorists or criminals in their country. So we have to have, United States already has more legal immigration than any country in the world. We have about 1 million legal immigrants per year. All these other folks are in addition to that. So there's a legal way to gain entry into the United States. Let's stick with that, and I'm all for enforcing it. The